Hello and welcome back to artofdino.com. And today I've got an interesting story and reading from the oil fields of Baku in the Caspian Sea, the prime area where war is being waged now, and just so many things have happened throughout the dawn of time. And I found this story very interesting, and sometimes how I go about making videos is I'll read a bunch of stuff, and then whatever lingers and makes me keep kind of thinking about it, I'll go back and I'll make a little video of. And so this one in particular had there was one story that I found about this area, this region of fire, that deals with the ancients, and then also a little bit of the history of petroleum in this region in the 1880s and before. But the ancient stuff is really amazing, these guardians of fire that I ended up reading about. So I found one clip. I finally found it. I was afraid I was going to have to make the video without finding the clip that really inspired the video, but I finally found it. So I'm going to read that one clip first. It's from the beginning of this book that I'll share and have the link with at the bottom, and then I'm going to read another chapter that also has interesting stuff on the ancients, on just everything about petroleum, because I have a feeling, again, petroleum is not what they say it is. It's definitely not dinosaur remnants and all that nonsense, fossil fuel-ish that they tell us. It's something definitely more magical. And this is the book, The Region of the Eternal Fire, which, it implies a lot. And this interesting stories at the beginning and always surrounding this kind of area. Very crazy. And they tell us now, using your car is going to lead to global warming, but they were blasting off oil fields all over the time, and they're almost a natural process of the earth. Might be a natural thing that happens of this living being, and the fuels from it, since we use them in so many different ways and they've got so much potential, are definitely not what they tell us, as always. So this is the part that I want to start with. This part is awesome. This just totally hooked me into this whole concept in this whole this book in general, and so it got me thinking, and I love just thinking about different things that are very interesting of the past, and this sure is that. So here we go. Region of the Eternal Fire. A few years ago, a solitary figure might have been daily seen on the shore of the Caspian Sea, worshipping a fire springing naturally from the petroleum gases in the ground. The devotee was a Parsi from India, the last of a series of priests who for more than 2,500 years had tended the sacred flame upon the spot. Round about his crumbling temple were rising greasy derricks and dingy kerosene distilleries, symbols of a fresh cult, the worship of Mammon. But absorbed in his devotions, the Parsi took no heed of the intruders, and so time passed on, and the last of the fire worshippers died, and with him perished the flame that was older than history, and yet not so. The flickering light the Guber priests had kept alive from the epoch of myths had only quitted the ruined temple to reappear in a million brilliant jets throughout a region stretching for thousands of miles around Baku, in the cities of the icy north, in the teeming villages of Middle Russia. Here and there upon the southern steppes, lighting up the strongholds of the Caucasus, the caravanserais of Persia, the tents of Askabad and Merv, flaring in the furnaces of hundreds of steamers on the Caspian and Volga, and locomotives traversing the valleys of the frosty Caucasus. The worship of the eternal fire in the Surakani temple is dead. The priest has left behind no followers, but the oil that dimly lit a shrine now illuminates an empire and bids ere long to give light and heat to an entire hemisphere. So, again, that stuck with me. That reading just really stuck with me because, what these people worshipped possibly for thousands of years was, what do we know? We don't know what it was like at first. It may have actually started, just being a natural flame in the ground, which I believe, and then maybe it was exploited at one point and then maybe brought back down as time went on and history fluctuated. But either way, they were viewing it at one point as just a sacred thing, as the earth is spewing fire from this natural crevice with this liquid and stuff around it that was new to them. It wasn't water. It was something totally different. It had use. It had fire connected to it, the elements. I can't imagine what the ancients thought of it. But now we know what the modern people think of it, and it's a lot different. So very interesting to see, because it's two total clashes of world. One really kind of like a pure one, and one now that's just, a capitalistic, I don't know what you'd really call it, but just an exploitation of it. So it's a just total difference in time of of what can happen and how people perceive the natural elements of this world. And so it is very interesting. And this whole Baku area is also very interesting because it was just huge in the past, and raging fires, tons of smoke coming from it, tons of oil being produced for petroleum jelly, locomotives, power. They talk even about how it's not even how some of the petroleum isn't, after a while, after it settles, it isn't even flaming or deadly. There's so much we don't know about this natural oil, and I wonder what the true divine cause and purpose of it is. What it does inside. Is it some kind of, is it like the pus of the earth human, the earth being, or is it like, something? What is it? What's in those crevices? What caused it over time? It's definitely not what they tell us. That's all I know. But here we go. I want to read some more of this, and it starts on page 159, the section that I'm going to read here, because I found this to be pretty interesting. And it has a lot of cool stuff, and just take from it what you will. And here's some old pictures to go along with it, and let me know. Share your insight below, and I'll chime in from time to time. So here we go. The cause of the progress and prosperity of Baku is oil, petroleum or rock oil, than which there is not a more copious or older known supply in the world. In England, we are accustomed to regard the petroleum trade as a new branch of the world's commerce. Yet for 2,500 years, Baku has been famous for its marvelous springs of petroleum, and we have historical evidence that for nearly 1,000 years, its oil resources have been drawn upon for the benefit of surrounding nations. See, that's what I say when that last Indian was there. He probably had been told stories about when it was in its prime at one point. I'm sure it's cycled. If this has been known for 2,500 years, then wow, probably a lot of important nations and people and times used it, and probably to power things because they had to have machines in order to make a lot of those buildings that we see and are dumbfounded by now. So here we go. It is noteworthy that at every epoch its petroleum supply has been spoken of as enormous and inexhaustible, and that there has never occurred in the region any phenomenon calculated to provoke or sustain the belief that the supply is intermittent, limited, or likely to rapidly come to an end. But nowadays we're running out, so the price has to go up. Various reasons contributed in ancient times to draw the attention of the Eastern world to the marvelous deposits of petroleum in the Absheron Peninsula, of which Baku is the principal center. Baku, in the first place, boasts of the best harbor in the Caspian Sea. Practically speaking, it is almost the only good natural harbor of any size on the Caucasus coast, and it is situated opposite what was once the outlet of the river Oxus into the Caspian, or of some partial waterway from Central Asia formed by the Balkan Bay running inland a considerable distance further than at present, and by the Oxus pursuing a more westerly course than today to meet it. The Indian trade in Pliny's time made its way to Europe by this route, and there is hardly a doubt that Baku rendered considerable service as a transit port. Such advantages of position naturally attracted the ancients to the place, but apart from Baku Bay, the peninsula of Absheron was calculated to thrust itself upon the notice of the world by a phenomenon which excites wonder even today. The peninsula juts far into the Caspian. At its extremity, and on the islands which stretch beyond it, petroleum gas has flared for countless ages, arresting the attention of navigators at sea as well as of people traveling by caravan on land by its lurid glare at night. Such a phenomenon could not but excite the wonder of the superstitious East, and it is probable that the eternal fire on the peninsula was an object of devotion on the part of the natives even before the worship of fire became the religion of the Persians. According to Jonas Hanway, the fire worshippers from India who flocked in his day to Baku had a tradition that the eternal fire had flamed ever since the flood, and that it would last to the end of the world. Speaking on the subjects of its antiquity, Mr. Arnold, MP for Salford, who visited Baku in 1875, says, 12 versts from Baku, we came upon one of the oldest altars in the world, erect and flaming with its natural burnt offering to this day. Surakani is the ancient seat of probably one of the most ancient forms of worship. For unnumbered ages, the gas which is generated by the subterranean store of oil has escaped from the fissures in the limestone crag, and the fire of this gas has lighted the prayers of generations of priests, as it blazed and flared away to the heavens. Fire worship in Persia, of which until the 18th century Baku formed a part, is older than history. It may be that the fire in this temple at Surakani has been unextinguished for a period extending from before the time of Cyrus at about 600 BC. the fire-worshipping period being older than Cyrus. Dr. Haig, a celebrated professor of Sanskrit at Munich, says that under no circumstances can we assign Zoroaster, the founder of fire worship, a later date than BC 1000, and one may even make him a contemporary of Moses. If this were correct, it would indeed give BAKU petroleum an antiquity, but the generality of English and German scholars concur in fixing the commencement of the Zoroastrian period about 600 BC, or nearly 2,500 years ago. Interesting. The petroleum fires of the Apsaran Peninsula being well known to the people of Persia in the district forming part of the Persian dominions and being easy to get at, the assumption is fair that from the earliest years of the Zoroastrian period, the worshippers of fire resorted to Baku to pay their devotions to the petroleum flame springing naturally from the soil. Baku, says Kinnear, was a celebrated city of the ancient worshippers of fire, and before the conquest of the Saracens, AD 636, was annually visited by thousands of pilgrims. The peninsula of Afsharan, says another authority, has been celebrated for many centuries in all eastern countries as a sacred soil, and the fire worshippers still make pilgrimages to adore the fires which there issue from the earth, arising from the ignition of the naturally formed naphtha, N-A-P-H-T-H-A. In ancient times, Baku was held in the highest veneration by the Gubers or Parsis and was frequented by thousands of pilgrims. On the site of the modern town, states the honorary George Keppel, who visited Baku in 1824, once stood a city celebrated in the times of the Gubers for its sacred temple on the altars of which blazed perpetual flames of fire produced by ignited naphtha. To this place, thousands of pilgrims paid their annual visits till the second expedition of Heraclius against the Persians, when he wintered in these plains and destroyed the temples of the Magi, the priests of the Zoroastrian sect. The naphtha or petroleum fires of Baku were thus in the zenith of their fame when the mighty military sway of the Persians, extending to Constantinople, was shattered by the Emperor Heraclius. In AD 624, according to Gibbon, Heraclius wintered in the Mogon steppes at the mouth of the river Kura, 70 miles south of Baku. There, says Gibbon, he signalized the zeal and revenge of a Christian emperor. At his command, the soldiers extinguished the fire and destroyed the temples of the Magi. Very interesting. And it makes you wonder what this was used for. Why? Was it just fire they were worshiping? Fire. I mean, these people look at everything, shamans and everything, as being, worshippers of blah, 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 blah. They look at it always under a certain lens. But were they utilizing all this stuff? Was this the fuel that kept things going? Is that why it was so important? Rather than just snuff out someone's religion to just stick it to them a little bit, I'm sure there was some monetary purposes involved. Although they like destroying people's faith as well, there's always something else behind it. This place must have been nuts. And there's some pictures where I'll show you where Nicholas II visits this place. And the area looks like it's been covered. There's stone walls and then there's hills of dirt. And so it's what was here? What was truly here? All right, back to page 163. 12 years after this, AD 636, Persia was vanquished a second time by the Arabs, who at the edge of the sword converted the people from fire worship to the Mussulman faith. Here and there, however, remnants of the ancient sect secretly performed their rites in southeast Persia, and large numbers fled to the island of Ormuz and thence to India, and gave origin to what are now the Parsis of Bombay. Although Muhammadan Persia intervened between the survivors and the eternal fire, many still continued to make their way annually to Baku. Even as late as the 12th century, pilgrimages were made to Baku, that Mecca of the Gubers, the purest fount of their sacred element. Very interesting, because if there's some place that sacred, like the equivalent of Mecca, then wow, a lot of people would want it, a lot of people would want to change it, and everyone would want to erase its history. While we have historical evidence that petroleum gases have been flaring away for more than 2,500 years on the Asfaran Peninsula, we have no direct testimony that the petroleum was exported as an article of commerce earlier than the 10th century, although there is no reason to disbelieve that it was used before then as light and fuel by surrounding nations. And that's what I said. In the year 950, the Arab writer Masudi wrote a brief description of the fire-breathing mountains of Baki, and then we have a gap until the time of Marco Polo. On the confines towards Georgine, wrote that traveler in the 13th century, there is a fountain from which oil springs in great abundance, inasmuch 100 shiploads might be taken from it at one time. This oil is not good to use with food, but 'tis good to burn, and is also good used to anoint camels that have the mange. People come from vast distances to fetch it, for in all countries round there is no other oil. Referring to this in a note, Colonel Yule, who is regarded as one of the foremost scholars of the day in matters appertaining to ancient Oriental geography, says, though Mr. Khanikoff, the celebrated Russian traveler of the 13th century, points out that springs of naphtha are abundant in the vicinity of Tiflis, the mention of shiploads in Ramesses, indeed, altered probably by the editor to camel loads, and the vast quantities spoken of point to the naphtha wells of the Baku Peninsula on the Caspian. Recold speaks of their supplying the old country as far as Baghdad, and Barbaro speaks of their practice of anointing camels with oil. This view is taken also by the Encyclopedia Britannica, Volume 3, page 259. Interesting. By the 13th century, therefore, crude petroleum was already an extensive article of export from Baku. Persia, which had formerly prized the place on account of its petroleum gas, creating the phenomenon of the eternal fire, now began to value it on account of its oil. Previous to its incorporation in the Russian Empire, Baku and its naphtha springs were long an apple of discord between the Persian Shahs and the Armenian emperors. Also interesting. When Peter the Great, that's another whole history that's just summed into a sentence, but it's hundreds of years of things that were happening. When Peter the Great commenced his series of conquests, having in view the conversion of the Caspian into a Russian lake, he took particular pains to secure Baku on account of the valuable trade in petroleum it carried on with Persia. On finally annexing it in 1723, he gave special instructions for extracting the oil and exporting it up the Volga to Russia. After his death, Nadir Shah recovered a deal of the Caspian littoral, and to put an end to the costly struggle with him, Russia restored Baku to Persia in 1735. A few years later, the Caspian Sea was invaded by a number of English pioneers of commerce, and one of the resetters, and one of them has furnished us with a work containing a valuable description of the petroleum industry under Persian rule. This was penned by Jonas Hanway in 1754 under the title of An Account of British Trade over the Caspian Sea, a work which is still a standard one on the Caspian region. In his time, the reign of George II, merchants of England were excited by the prospect of opening up trade with India and the East via the Caspian Sea. A number of schemes were broached. The all-powerful Turkey and Russia companies fought for the concession of the trade. The matter was made the subject of diplomatic discussion between England and Russia, and finally, in 1741, Parliament gave the monopoly to the Russia Company. The Russia Company. I wonder how powerful that was. Captain Elton, who had long been in the Russian service and had explored the Caspian 3 years earlier, was sent with a consignment of goods to the Persian ports of the sea with Captain Woodruff as commander. These officers, neglecting the interests of the company for those of Nadir Shah, one of the most intelligent and sagacious of the partners, Mr. Jonas Hanway, was deputed to proceed to Persia to investigate affairs. On his return, he published a bulky work in which he not only embodied his own experiences in the Caspian, but also the surveys of Elton and Woodruff and a mass of historical data taken from the archives of the company to which he belonged. What the goobers or fire worshippers call the everlasting fire, he says, is a phenomenon of a very extraordinary nature. This object of devotion lies about 10 English miles northeast by east from the city of Baku on a dry rocky land. There are several ancient temples built with stone supposed to have been all dedicated to fire. Amongst others is a little temple at which the Indians now worship. Here are generally 40 or 50 of these poor devotees who come on a pilgrimage from their own country. A little way from the temple is a low cleft of a rock in which there is a horizontal gap, 2 feet from the ground, nearly 6 long and about 3 broad, out of which issues a constant flame, in color and gentleness, and not unlike a lamp that burns with spirits, only more pure. When the wind blows, it rises sometimes 8 feet high, but much lower in still weather. They do not perceive that the flame makes any impression on the rock. This also the Indians worship, and say it cannot be resisted, but if extinguished, will rise in another place. The earth round the place for above 2 miles has the surprising property that by taking up 2 or 3 inches of the surface and applying a live coal, the part which is so uncovered immediately takes fire, almost before the coal touches the earth. The flame makes the soil hot, but does not consume it, nor affect what is near it with any degree of heat. Any quantity of this earth carried to another place does not produce this effect. Not long since 8 horses were consumed by this fire, being under a roof where the surface of the ground was turned up, and by some accident took flame. If a cane or tube, even of paper, be set about 2 inches in the ground, confined and closed with earth below, and the top of it touched with a live coal, and blown upon, immediately a flame issues without hurting either the cane or paper, provided the edges be covered with clay. In this method they use for light in their houses, which have only the earth for the floor. 3 or 4 of these lighted canes will boil water in a pot, and thus they dress their victuals. The flame may be extinguished in the same manner as spirits of wine. The ground is dry and stony, and the more stony any particular part is, the stronger and clearer is the flame. It smells sulphurous, like naphtha, but not very offensive. Very interesting, because nowadays, wow, what they claim to be the process of refining oil is very interesting. And where are they getting that crude from? How does it differ from this pure stuff from BAKU? And what else are they not telling us about the oil industry and everything else surrounding it? There are so many oils in all these different products. What are the magical properties that they have extinguished from our reality? I wonder. Lime is burnt to great perfection by means of this phenomenon, the flame communicating itself to any distance where the earth is uncovered to receive it. The stones must be laid on one another, and in 3 days the lime is completed. Near this place brimstone is dug, and naphtha springs are found. Baku, he continues, supplies Gilan and Mazandaran and other countries contiguous with naphtha. In his days, the chief place for the black or dark gray naphtha was the small island Witoy, now uninhabited, except at such times as they take naphtha from thence. By Witoy he meant Sviatoy, or Holy Island, off the extremity of the peninsula of Absheron. Describing the operations of the petroleum exporters, he says, "The Persians loaded in bulk in their wretched vessels, so that sometimes the sea is covered with it for leagues together. When the weather is thick and hazy, the springs boil up the higher, and the naphtha often takes fire on the surface of the earth, and runs in a flame into the sea, in great quantities, to a distance almost incredible. In clear weather the springs do not boil up above 2 or 3 feet. In boiling over, the oily substance makes so strong a consistency as by degrees almost to close the mouth of the spring. Sometimes it is quite closed, and forms hillocks that look as black as pitch, but the spring, which is resisted in one place, breaks out in another. Some of the springs, which have not been long open, form a mouth of 8 or 10 feet in diameter. The people carry the naphtha by troughs into pits or reservoirs, drawing it off from one to another, leaving in the first reservoir the water or the heavier part with which it is mixed when it issues from the spring. It is unpleasant to the smell, and used mostly among the poorer sorts of the Persians and other neighboring people, as we use oil in lamps or to boil their victuals. But it communicates a disagreeable taste. They find it burns best with a small mixture of ashes. As they obtain it in great abundance, every family is well supplied. They keep it at a small distance from their homes, in earthen vessels underground, to prevent any accident by fire, of which it is extremely susceptible." So, there's also one little last thing. Sviatoy, or Holy Island, seems to have been selected by the Persians as the principal place for extracting the oil because the beds were close to the shore and on a level with the sea. The island, however, has the drawback of indifferent harbor accommodations, so that once the petroleum trade assumed considerable proportions, it became obviously better to extract the oil from the mainland close to the splendid port of Baku. There is no reason to believe that the supply on the island has in any way diminished since Jonas Hanway's time. The only European traveler who appears to have visited it since John Osmaston, an English tourist who landed there in 1861 with a German who was putting up a refinery. The naphtha beds, he says, lie on the west of the island and are of very considerable extent. They are nearly all on a level with the sea and of a uniform black color, nothing growing upon them, and the surface flat, with pools of black-colored water upon it. In several places gas was bubbling up through the water, and on a calm day it will easily ignite. Stones had been piled round one of these bubblings, forming a little chimney round it. On applying a lighted stick, the whole chimney was filled with a pale yellow flame, which would continue burning for any length of time, if not extinguished by wind or rain. The depth of the bitumen beds is unknown. Baron Thielman, in describing his journey, that's it. I'll leave it with that. The depth of the bitumen beds is unknown. as is the depth of everything. We know nothing. And I wonder how many different things around the world, how many different times this popped up, because I doubt it only popped up in one spot. This place had a considerable industry that grew from it. How many places around the world were emitting some form of sacred fire like this that weren't exploited, and that just ended up in little craters or little tunnels or little things? And what is the earth doing at these places that does this? What does that mean? Like, what is the wellspring of all these? There's different even in the old whatchamacallit, in the Hindu Jainism version of the world, the concentric rings around are all different substances, and I believe one of them's milk, one of them's water, and I believe one of them is oil. So if that is, forming, if in ancient times they had all these different thoughts of the oil and doing different things, and the properties must have been different, the uses must have been even different, the worship, the intention, the everything they knew was different, and now we just see it as a shell of what it was, the magic eviscerated, and it's just kind of, it's used for wars, it's used for everything kind of weird nowadays, but also amazingly necessary. And how many times has this happened in the past? How many cycles have we gone through where we utilize this substance, and then the powers that be tell us it's evil, it needs to be stopped, it's destroying us, so we have to stop it, we have to close it off, we have to seal it off. Like the airships, they crashed a couple times, they've got to break, they've got to be done, we're done with airships. The trains and planes that are happening now, they keep sabotaging too much, they're becoming too dangerous, we can't keep control of it, we have to end those modes. All these things that they always find, the powers that be that are terrible, always seem to find a way to end things that are good and beneficial to humanity and are plentiful, especially. And they change them, they manipulate them through propaganda, they make people think bad of them, they make people's perspectives completely shift from something that's holy and sacred to something that is just a nightmare and needs to be removed in order for us to progress and get smarter as humans. But we know that never works. So very interesting. I just wanted to share this all with you because it conjures up a lot of imagery, and that's what I really like a lot. I don't claim to know the truth about any of these things, and I might say some stuff that's just totally ludicrous. I might say some stuff that's maybe right on, but it's all just kind of adding to the vision. Like, I love thinking about the history of those guardians of the fire, who then inevitably had such a rise for so many years, millennium. And then all of a sudden, the fires are taken over by this thing. And these people built these castles, all these stone things all over the place to worship this. And then it just gradually crumbles. It gets buried over. It's, we have all these things. The nature does this. The earth does this. It produces this thing. It has to be of good. And, what we turn to it as through miseducation and wrong think is it can be scary and can be totally wrong and set us back. So I like to just think about things the way they were, because it seems like back in the day they had the better idea than they do now. So who knows? Just worth thinking about. Something very fascinating. Hope you all enjoyed it. And if there's any guardians of the fire out there, keep going. Bless you all.